Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy Monday of a holiday week. So hopefully everybody's getting to kind of celebrate a little bit of a short work week. And if you're taking a little lunch break with me here, catching my Learn with Flo live, welcome. I'm excited to continue to really work our way through this series of November that we've really dived into the topic of burnout. Now, burnout, as we've defined, is more so not just a mental emotional level of burnout, but we've started to even talk about the physical ramifications of burnout and how a lot of us are really, really bad at actually quantifying the amount of stress that's impacting our body physically and mentally. So just so that we're all on the same page here, in case you missed the first couple weeks, I encourage you to go back and watch those in detail, but at least just to get us to a place today where I want to kind of build on this conversation, let's make sure we're all on the same page of really looking at what is that definition of burnout. I think that this definition to me really resonates, and it's found to me resonating with a lot of my clients as well too. So burnout is the physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitude towards themselves and others due to a stress overload state. If that doesn't just embody what a lot of people are experiencing these days and kind of normalizing these days, I don't know what else is, right? We kind of have this total body experience around burnout, but I think a lot of times we only ever think about the mental and the emotional piece of our body instead of really treating it as a total body approach. So in this Learn with Flo series, we've really gotten a chance to recognize some of those subtle signs and symptoms of burnout that, like I said, sometimes we don't even associate with burnout, or we're kind of barking down the complete wrong tree when we're kind of experiencing some of these symptoms or thinking that we have all of these individual problems when in reality it's probably just one major problem. So when we're those people that, like I said, we're experiencing that negativity towards ourselves and others, that can be a big sign. Feeling stressed out often, easily irritable, fluctuations in body composition, right? Weight loss resistance, your body is kind of holding on to some of those negative emotions or feeling unsafe. So even weight gain around your midsection can be signs of burnout. Inability to relax. Those people that are I can't meditate, I can't relax, I can't do yoga. I'm that's probably your body trying to communicate with you. You're having trouble getting restful sleep. Maybe you're experiencing headaches or migraines or dizzy spells. Maybe you're craving salt and sugar or experiencing brain fog and difficulty concentrating, low libido, or you're experiencing nagging injuries and pain, persistent illness. All of these things can be signs and symptoms of more of that chronic burnout picture, right? And now that we know what burnout really feels like in the body, I think, like I said, though, many of us are still really bad at being able to understand and actually put a grip on seeing the impact that burnout is having on us physically. We might think that we're handling it well, but you turn around and look at different lab markers, right, from the body, which we talked about last week, may really be telling us a different story. And I really have found for quite a few individuals, myself included, sometimes really seeing the labs is that thing that sparks change or sparks the motivation for change, because they don't really realize how much of that a mental, emotional, and physical stress that they're carrying until they really see it on their labs. So that's kind of the funky thing about this burnout situation, is we know that burnout is the result of chronic stress, right? It's a stress response that hasn't been shut off. It's a stress response that hasn't been dealt with. And so the body is literally in that moment slowly burning out. Physical symptoms, physical systems are slowly burning out. So recognize that stress doesn't just have to be a perceived stress. It's actually a set of things that are measurable, and they're objective physiological changes that start to happen in the physical body. We start to see the physical body breaking down before our eyes, and that's because cortisol, our body's main stress hormone, is a catabolic hormone. That's its job, is to break things down and try to liberate energy and resources for a body that's just running on fumes right now, right? So it's not it's not inaccurate to feel like, oh man, my body's just really breaking down. And it's like, okay, that's really kind of a sign of this burnout picture. So for a lot of people, I do encourage them, like we talked about last week, is test, don't guess here, right? A lot of times, like high cortisol can also mimic some symptoms of low cortisol, and then you can loop in the wrong treatment pattern. So I really think that functional lab testing here really shines, because we can start to identify, like, where am I at on this spectrum of burnout? Are we in a place where we're catching it early? Or are we in a place where it's like, ooh, I've really been down this rabbit hole for weeks, months, years, sometimes even decades now. And I'm starting to just now wrap my mind around the physical effects that this is happening on my body. So we talked last week about how functional labs here can really shine, because if we know what we're looking for, we can absolutely see signs and symptoms of burnout on labs, right? And that can kind of direct our treatment strategy then. So I talked about last week how this burnout can show up in your blood sugar markers on a lab, right? It can show up in elevated fasting glucose levels. It can also show up in our thyroid health, right? Elevated TSH levels, or low T4, low T3, high reverse T3. We can see depleted electrolyte picture, right? So there's lots of things we can identify in the blood that kind of look like this burnout picture. We can also see things in more functional testing, such as like Dutch testing, saliva testing, urinary testing, where we're able to see free cortisol, metabolized cortisol. We can see things like DHEA, which is another major vigor and verve and vitality hormone that's created from our adrenals, and eventually downstream gets converted into sex hormones, right? Which is why our stress response and our burnout response is one of those root causes of a lot of deeper hormonal issues, right? And a lot of people, they don't necessarily put two and two together there, or they kind of like blindly unaware like of that connection. They're like, oh no, I'm stressed, but like, can you just give me a little testosterone? It's like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way, right? It's like, we have to ask the bigger question, why? Like, why is your body not able to keep up with adequate testosterone production right now? Like, we could sprinkle some testosterone in, but it's not going to fix the issue, right? That's not the problem. So we really got a chance to kind of look at how we could see things like a full cortisol picture throughout the course of a day, which is more of that gold standard testing. And we can also look at other systems like mineral deficiencies, gut health, and detoxification pathways. I cannot tell you how frequently I see individuals that have been or are currently under chronic stress, and taking a look at some people really manifest a lot of that in gut symptoms. They don't necessarily, again, put two and two together until you start educating them on it, but we see a depressed immune system function. We see individuals that are struggling with low or depleted beneficial bacteria, and this can show up in autoimmune patterns. This can show up in, for some people, hair loss, right? It can, some people show up as difficulty with like mood and neurotransmitter production. So there's so many different patterns that start to manifest from this chronic stress and burnout picture, which is why I think that this conversation is so important for people to recognize, because we end up with these like downstream issues of like, oh no, these are gut symptoms, or no, I have hormonal imbalance symptoms, or no, I have an autoimmune pattern. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, I understand all of that, and I'm tracing it back to like, how did we get here, right? Which is where the conversation really comes into play today, because in my experience, especially women, a lot of times, like I said, we're smart. We have that intuitive nature around our body. We know that something's off there. We know that something's wrong. A lot of women that I've worked with that have experienced some of this burnout, they've kind of made it this far, right, in the journey. They've seen the doctors, whether that's a conventional medicine practitioner, functional medicine practitioner. They've run all of the labs, right? Whether that's fancy testing, like, more functional testing and saliva testing or stool testing, or they've done advanced hormonal testing with their doctor or their practitioner. A lot of people have made it that far, right? They're like, I saw my doctor, I told them this, they ran all these labs, and they, either said everything was normal, or they kind of gave me XYZ recommendation, right? So I see that's not usually the issue of like recognizing the symptoms, asking for help, getting the labs drawn. That's usually not where people stray, right? Where people stray and where I really want to talk about today is that next step after we've gone to our professionals and after we've gotten the labs. That's the fork in the road. That's the key part right there of like, okay, now what are we going to do with that information? Right? That's really kind of that important thing now. That's the determining factor of the trajectory of the next 5 to 10 years for that individual. It's like, we recognize there's a problem. We got some labs, we got some data around it. Great, amazing, awesome. Now though, I think that there's kind of, again, a big fork in the road where people either kind of get misled and continue to go down the road of burnout, or they actually start to dig into that root cause, and they're the people that end up being able to source their own healing of that burnout journey. And so this is where I think that fork in the road is kind of that ultimate holy grail question, is really what determines someone's fork. Which direction are you going? And I will say that I think the common mistake that I see, either coming from practitioners or coming from patients themselves, the wrong question to ask in that situation. Like I said, you went to the doctor, you've made your needs known, you've gotten the labs, this is fantastic. And the number one mistake then is asking the question of, what can I take for that? Number one mistake, right? It's just that same mindset of, oh, what supplement can I take for that? Well, what prescription can I take for that? What hormones can I take for that? And it's like, we've missed the mark. We've missed the message. This is the opportunity of our body trying to communicate with us. And we're over here still trying to like not listen and just shut those symptoms off and move on our merry way, right? And it's like, the real key here is like that, if you're asking those questions of like, what do I take for this? You're down the trajectory where this is just going to be an ongoing problem for you. You might shut down one symptom of burnout, but then it's just going to spring up somewhere else, right? I was just having a conversation with a client about this, and for her, we were talking about it in terms of even like cholesterol markers, right? And labs. And she's like, I really just don't accept the answer that I need to be on just a statin. And I'm like, I respect that, right? Because what's going to happen is this is your opportunity. This is your body trying to communicate with you about something, right? So if we just come in and like, we could put a statin on the cholesterol panel, sure, but then that problem still exists. We didn't ask ourselves the question like, well, why? Why is that cholesterol up? So it's just going to spring up somewhere else, right? So this year it's a statin. Next year you need blood pressure meds. The next year it's an antidepressant. The next year it's like an on and on and on, because our body is just going to find other avenues and ways to try to express that to us, whether we decide to listen to one or we don't get the message until years down the road. That's what happens when we ask that question of like, well, what can I take for that, doc? It's like, that's not the question. That's probably the number one mistake that's going to determine your trajectory here. Instead, I really want you guys to think a little differently. And I urge you to ask this one major question when you're in this position of like managing certain signs and symptoms that are coming to your body. You've made your needs known. You've run these labs. You're taking a look at them. The question now becomes, how did I get here and what needs to change? That's it. That's the work, right? And that's where I think digging into this a little bit in our time today is going to be so insightful for you guys, just to kind of like change the narrative and change the mindset. It's really just like tomato, right? It's not anything different. We're just a whole different mindset though of somebody that comes in and does all of this data collection and really thinks about like, well, what can I take for that? That's somebody that doesn't necessarily want to be an active participant in their own healing, or they're not really ready to come to the table and recognize where this position came from. Where did they get here, right? There is, although we don't always want to accept it, there is probably a systematic order of events that brought you to this place of, in our case, what we're talking about today, burnout, right? there was a series of events that got you here. I'm not saying all of it was within your control, but I'm also saying that, yeah, all of us have that personal level of accountability into our health. It's nobody else's problem, right? Nobody else is going to do anything about it for us. So we have to be able to come to the table and do like an audit of that exact question, right? It's like, ooh, that really gives us a lot of opportunity here of asking more once we get those labs and we identify how our body is physically manifesting this burnout. Now our homework and our question and the real work becomes, how did I get here and what needs to change? This, my friends, is like true functional medicine. So if you don't have a practitioner or you're interested in more of the functional medicine side of managing your health, and you have worked with what you thought was a functional practitioner, but they aren't asking you this, they're not helping you go through this conversation, they're not really a functional practitioner. They might be like a greenwashed functional medicine, which we've talked about on a Learn with Flo episode as well too. But it's no different of like, what supplement can I take versus what prescription can I take? I'm like, that's not the work. That's not the message, right? It's the message is, how did I get here and what needs to change, right? You're not going to find a pill or a prescription or really like a quick fix for something like a burnout. And that's because it's just going to spring up somewhere else anyway. So it's not going to help you, right? And if anyone is trying to sell you like that pill or that prescription and they're like, yeah, here, just start taking this. And they're not discussing with you though, like, okay, we really need to do an audit of like, how did we get here and what needs to change? Run. That is a practitioner that's either out for your money or they're really just trained more to like spot treat your labs. They were trained in some sort of model to be like, there's her cholesterol, I need to lower it. I'm like, but what about the question that like cholesterol is a major anti-inflammatory molecule in our body? So why are we not asking the question of why is her liver upregulating anti-inflammatory substances? Like, where's the inflammation? Like, go hunting for that. Don't just shut off the cholesterol because the inflammation still exists. It's just going to pop up somewhere else. Like, are we really doing that person a service? No, we're not. We're just like kicking the can down the road. So we have to recognize that really what I want to leave you guys with today is that understanding that something like a burnout picture is the result of living in what we call an evolutionary mismatch. What the heck is evolutionary mismatch? It's this concept that we're physically living outside of our innate biological hormonal rhythms in which we were designed to live, right? There's some sort of mismatch. We're not living a daily routine. We're not part of an environment in which our body was designed to function. And so because of that, our body's like, what the heck is this environment? And it's having to create compensations all over the board and all over the map, which are those signs and those symptoms, right? So let's take, for example, those of us that were born female at birth, right? Our bodies are dictated by two main hormonal rhythms. We have the light and dark cycle of the sun, or your circadian rhythm, but we also have this set infradian rhythm, which is more a 28-day cycle that aligns to the cycle of the moon or a lunar cycle, right? So because of that, we have these natural hormonal ebbs and flows, but based off of tons of different factors in our environment, a lot of which are under our control, we can either live in alignment to those hormonal rhythms and feel great, or we can live out of alignment of those hormonal rhythms and suffer the consequences, right? So that's what I mean when I say evolutionary mismatch is like, regardless of how we really feel about it, we are born with those physical hormonal rhythms. And when we try to like divorce ourselves from these hormonal rhythms or shut them off, that's when problems start to really rise up and exist. So I talk a lot about this as well too. This will be beyond what we'll cover in today's scope, but we are all born with, like I said, a balance of feminine and masculine energy as well too, right? So even part of kind of this standard American patriarchy system is there's a lot of different things that are designed more around a dude's metabolism, right? Like our appetite is exactly the same every day. Our energy is exactly the same every day. Eat the exact same amount of calories every day, or, work out exactly the same every day. And that's living out of alignment with our natural female physiology. And that's why a lot of women tend to kind of struggle with that when they find themselves completely abandoning their more feminine energy for more masculine energy, that hustle and grind culture, And so that can really cause a lot of opportunities for women to feel very out of sync and out of touch with that feminine cycle. So if you're willing to zoom out and ask that all important question of like, how did I get here and what needs to change? These are kind of some of the following categories that I want you guys to start to think about, because I tried to pick out a lot of things that I feel like, one, I talk to my clients about a lot, and two, the things that are controllable. Right? No one wants to sit here and talk about things that we can't necessarily control. I'm talking about the ways that we incidentally, whether it's intentional or unintentional, force ourselves out of our natural hormonal rhythms, and we're living in an evolutionary mismatch. So let's really just start at the top, an obvious one that I think we can all kind of agree on, right? Nutritionally, how do we push ourselves out of alignment of our natural hormonal rhythms? Let's just take women as an example, pretty much always dieting in some way, shape, or form. When in reality, the hormonal rhythm of the female body is hardwired for fertility and safety. Those are the two things it's hardwired for, right? Whether you're intentionally wanting to bear children or bear offspring or not, working in alignment with that natural hormonal rhythm is going to put that female physique in the best possible place to thrive, right? We can't diet our way into a body that's in this like survival and scarcity mode and expect it to thrive. It's like, no, we're out of alignment of our innate physiology there. I know we've talked about that before around, chronic undereating and that being a major contributor to burnout for the female physiology, whether that's intentional or unintentional. If you want to hear more about that undereating pattern, check out our October Learn with Flow series, because I did a whole series on underfueling, which kind of leads us to this burnout series. So from a self-reflection standpoint around nutrition, you may need to do some self-reflection or some work with a professional like myself to really change your fueling habits to be more in alignment with your natural hormonal rhythm, and really help kind of reform your relationship with food towards something that tends towards adequate nourishment in order to heal from burnout, right? You're probably not going to continue to diet and calorie count your way out of burnout. Just ain't gonna work, right? So that's part of that self-reflection of like, how did I get here? What might need to change? Second thing I think is kind of like a big one that I work through a lot is that relationship with movement. Over-exercising as a means of stress management is not stress management to the female physique. I had a peer tell me one time, like, your body doesn't care what your brain thinks about it. Right? So if your body sees what you're doing as stressful, then you're like, it doesn't matter how you feel about it, right? It's like, but I love my 5 a.m. CrossFit class. It's like, well, maybe your body doesn't really dig that right now, right? It's out of alignment with your overall physiology, or your body's not well resourced enough to handle that particular stress. And so even though you love it, it's like your body may not be loving it. So that's something that we have to come to the table about, right? Because all of our stress goes into one common bucket. We talked about that allostatic load last week. And so what one woman might be able to handle, another woman might not be able to handle. That is the difference in allostatic load. So this is something that frequently we might have to come to the table and talk about. What is our relationship with activity and movement right now? Does that need to change in order to match your current hormonal situation? Or like, how do we need to evaluate that relationship there, because there may be some sort of evolutionary mismatch when it comes to either our frequency or our intensity of our workouts for the female physique, especially my menstrual cycling females. Love to hate it, right? But it is what it is. Other major category that I think it deserves a lot of self-reflection too is alignment to that circadian rhythm. I know it sounds woo-woo, but like I said, the light and dark cycles of the sun are going to be really key here as well too. So it's like, how much sunlight exposure are we getting during the day? Are we always inside and we're under the same level of ambient light and I don't get sunshine ever? It's just light from indoor light, because all of our cells on our body, every single cell in our body has a clock, right? And every organ operates on a clock too. Chinese medicine is really, really big into this. So if you're interested in it, Chinese medicine and body clocks, you'll see so much good stuff around like the liver hour being between 1 and 3 a.m. So individuals that wake up between 1 and 3 a.m., it's like, what's going on with my liver function, right? So we can garner a lot of stuff if we know how to listen to our body and listen to our body's systems. But when it comes to like circadian rhythm and sleep and energy, it's like, it's not normal to have to sedate our sleep, and it's not normal to have to caffeinate our morning energy. That has become normalized by our society that's living out of alignment with our natural circadian and hormonal rhythms, yes, but just because it is common does not make it normal by any stretch of the capacity. That's just a sign of misalignment. And if that's happening there, then you know that there's more systems that are being impacted as well too. So are you spending your whole day inside? Are you getting sunlight? Are you shutting off lights after sundown? Are you eating when the sun is out? And talking about meal timing in that regard as well. So a lot of times as part of this journey of like, how did I get here? What needs to change? I talk with my clients a lot of times about bedtime boundaries, around circadian rhythm alignment, prioritizing a recovery routine, nervous system regulation techniques, things like that, because you're not going to be able to just live the same lifestyle that you were living and heal from burnout just by taking a supplement, right? It's like, oh, but I started taking some ashwagandha and some phosphatidylserine. I'm like, that's cool. You do you, man. But like, that's not, you can't just put that into the system and expect that you're going to magically heal from burnout. You're still in the same environment that made you sick, right? Speaking of environment, another one that we may need to come to terms with too is things like environmental toxins, whether that's, our body's overall allostatic load may not be able to handle some of the different like plastics or pesticides or fragrances and a lot of our personal care products. So that might be needing to be part of the burnout recovery considerations. Things like hormonal birth control in this kind of environmental toxins or medications conversation as well too. I mean, let's be real. When you're a menstrual cycling woman, like talk about divorcing yourself from your natural hormonal rhythms. I mean, that's exactly what hormonal birth control is doing. It is in no way, shape, or form regulating your menstrual cycle. It is shutting that brain to ovarian connection off. And so like, that's a really big way that our body is shut off from that. And I think that one of the most impactful things that women can do is to be tracking their hormonal rhythms, tracking their monthly menstrual cycle, using that as a data metric, and even changing their nutrition and exercise in regards to their overall menstrual cycle as well too. So especially my menstrual cycling women that are struggling with some hormonal imbalance issues or symptoms and are coming to me, it doesn't just have to be fertility issues, but just like they don't feel great, their body composition is off, they have a lot of anxiety, they have gut issues, whatever it is. I'm like, getting back in touch with our menstrual cycles is a really big key of that equation as well too. And then we can always talk about some of the mental, emotional side of things too here. I think we have to look at areas where are areas in your life where you're over functioning? Where are areas in your life where your work schedule is outside of alignment to your natural hormonal rhythms? Where is your boundaries or lack thereof of boundaries outside of your natural hormonal rhythm? So these types of things are really big questions. Again, giving into kind of like that hustle and grind culture that's a little bit more in alignment to like a male physiology of that 24-hour clock, that can throw some women off into some burnout. Saying yes and overcommitting to things because as nature, we try to associate our productivity with our worth, or we're constantly trying to people please other people to avoid conflict. And it's like we find ourselves saying yes to things that aren't really like a hell yes. And we build up a lot of this resentment around it. We overcommit ourselves. We fill our plate too full, but we're we won't say no to something because we don't want to let somebody down. All of these types of things, and learning how to create boundaries is something that I work with my clients, specifically my women, a lot on. And it's something we definitely celebrate, because there's sometimes we look at that allostatic bucket and something's got to come out of that bucket, right? So really doing some of that audit for yourself, I think is really big as well too. And then of course we can resource out for dealing with things like stress or trauma that are stored in our body that we also need some help processing with some other even mental health professionals, because that can also contribute to that burnout state, right? So really kind of big picture, I wanted to give you guys through kind of this process of really recognizing, let's come to the table and say, okay, what the heck is burnout, right? That physical, mental, emotional state of really feeling that, lowered performance. We're seeing decreased motivation. We're seeing negative attitude. We're seeing all of the signs and symptoms physically of burnout. And we can even do more advanced labs and start to see and recognize, where are we at on that burnout spectrum? Are we catching it early and our body is starting to make some compensations that are just going to tailspin if we don't do something about it now? Or are we that person that's actively in a state of a pretty depleted burnout picture, and we need to do that work to kind of climb ourselves out before it becomes something bigger, kind of chronic disease, autoimmune type patterns, right? But even once we get to that place of recognition, awareness, and some data around it, there's that all important fork in the road where I see too many people these days just want that answer of well, what can I take for that? And it's that's not the work here. The work is in taking the other fork in the road and asking the question of how did I get here and what needs to change? Because how you got here is the treatment. That's the treatment. And I'm not saying we can't use some supplements and some prescriptions in the meantime as a bridge, because some of that inner work, that's going to take some time to kind of untangle and create some of that capacity for healing. I totally understand that. I help people. I'm going to throw you plenty of life rafts in the meantime, whether that's supplements or, like I said, things of that nature that we're going to help you, but I don't want to dismiss the work of that side of the journey too, where we really get to dig back and self-reflect on where we got here as well too. So hopefully that really helps you guys start to see where some of these daily patterns, whether it's nutrition or movement, circadian rhythm, environmental toxins, hormonal birth control, lack of boundaries, and overfunctioning, where all of that contributes to that overall allostatic load bucket and is going to eventually lead to burnout. So don't let somebody convince you that stress or burnout is something that you can't control, because I think it's probably one of the biggest things within our control. And in our society today, it's all the more reason that we have the tools to be able to do that, because otherwise our physical body and our physical health really suffers as well too. So if you're interested in, like I said, digging into some of that evolutionary mismatch for yourself, that's exactly what I do in a lot of my one-on-one work together. So feel free to head to the link in my bio. There is an application link there to work with me one-on-one. Application process is open for December. There's limited spots available for that. So if you're interested, make sure you submit your application ASAP. And we can always dive into, like I said, more of those functional labs and more of this evolutionary mismatch and untangle that web together for you as well too. So hopefully this was helpful for you. Everybody enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday, and we will see you guys back for next Learn with Lo.